Well, joining me now is the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island. Senator, let me just start with this. You heard Paul Ryan say about a Syria strategy that he doesn't think the president has one. The administration says this is the same strategy. Nothing has really changed. This is an additional tactic. What say you, Senator Reed?
Well, there's a strategy against ISIL, which is the major threat to the region and to the United States. They're the the terrorist element that has talked about attacks outside the region, and if they could do it, would probably try to accomplish those attacks. So that represents a significant threat to the United States and the president's and assisting our allies in the region, in Iraq particularly, and also trying to create sort of forces on the ground in Syria to go after ISIL. That's the major focus of our activities. On the front with respect to the outside government, that has been more of a political approach. In fact, Secretary Kerry is meeting this weekend in Vienna with a host of other countries to see if there's a political way forward to eliminate, that's our goal, and not our goal alone, eliminate the Assad regime, to get Assad out of Syria. So those are two complementary efforts. One is very much military, and that's the ISIL attacks.
I guess I'm going to ask you this, though, so we're putting 50 special forces on to help the Kurds, obviously puts our men and women potentially in harm's way. The actions never match the rhetoric. The rhetoric is, this is a grave threat, this is potentially a direct threat to the United States, but then there's a lot of hesitation in what we're actually going to do about it. And so I feel like there's a mixed message here. Is it fair to say we're getting a mixed message?
Well, I think the message is complicated because you have first the reality of Assad in Damascus, and we've taken a political approach, and then you have the reality of ISIL both in Iraq and in Syria. In Iraq, we are operating directly with the support of the government, the legitimate government. In Syria, it's much more complicated because it is rebels who are trying to mount an offensive against ISIL, and we're supporting them, and then against in addition against the government. So it is one of the most complicated situations, and I don't think it's unusual that not only the message would appear to be complicated, but the reality is complicated.
50 special forces, this going to make a difference?
What it will do is, I think, increase the capability of those Syrian units on the ground. The president has been, and as your statements indicated, his own words indicated, been trying to avoid the commitment of significant American ground forces, and at the same time being able to utilize effectively Syrian forces on the ground. And this recent decision represents a conclusion that those forces can be enabled, can be made more effective, can use our resources, our airstrikes, our resupply strikes, if they have at a relatively high level, away from the front line, if you will, American advisors who will coordinate. But let me just emphasize that those soldiers, those special operators, are in danger. We, in fact, have had special operations in Syria. We mounted a raid months ago.
I was just going to say, is this really new, or are we just acknowledging it?
Well, I think it's much more public in terms of, and more long-term. The raid that we conducted with special operators to take out an ISIL leader a few months ago in Syria was not acknowledged. It was part of our ongoing strategy of anywhere in the world where there is a recognizable, identifiable, and legally targetable jihadists, will go after them. But that was done in Syria. I think the difference here is this represents not just a one-time operation, maybe coupled with others. This is sending people down on a longer-term basis.
Are we convinced the Russians aren't going to bomb our troops?
We should make it very clear that that would be absolutely unacceptable. That would be absolutely foolhardy on the part of the Russians. We can't stand by and allow our forces to be targeted by anyone. What I think, in terms of practical terms, is that the location of these forces, these special operators, and the mission is such that they're remote. So I think the idea that they would be directly in the position of a Russian strikes, that's not the case. But we have to make it very clear. We can't accept that.
All right, the president made this decision using a war authorization that George W. Bush asked for nearly 15 years ago. We've been told there's going to be a new authorization. We've been told that there was going to be a new authorization for this entire ISIL strategy. We still don't have it. They're using the 2001 AUMF. Is this appropriate?
I think it's appropriate at this juncture for the reasons you point out, Chuck. It's been 15 years. The focus were terrorists who were attacking the United States, and frankly, these are their, literal and figurative descendants. So that is valid still. But nevertheless, I think after these years, it would be helpful to have a vigorous debate, to engage in a principled way.
Well, what's the fear? Leadership won't let you guys do it. Are they afraid it's not going to happen? Is that why they don't want to? I mean, I'm sorry. It looks like you guys are afraid to go on the record.
Well, here's the one data point, at least. There was a proposal being weighed by the Foreign Relations Committee to authorize airstrikes in Syria when the Syrians deployed chemical weapons. And as my recollection, that passed the Foreign Relations Committee, never got to the floor, but passed the Foreign Relations Committee by a narrow margin. I think it was 10-8. So, this, unlike what happened, and I was there immediately after 9/11, there was not this unanimity. There's no, of purpose and of vision. And I think there is a concern that this would become, rather than a principled debate about what's good for the country, it could fall into more of a political discussion. And I don't think that would be helpful to our national security. But I think, if you're asking principle, I think if we could set up the parameters, and this is where the leaders come in, and so that this debate is principled and focused and is constructive and leads to an updated and more responsive AUMF, I'm all for that.
I tell you, the vicious circle, though, the Washington dysfunction makes it so we can't do this, which creates more Washington dysfunction. I get what you're saying, but I have to tell you, it does want to make you bang your head against the wall. Senator Jack Reed,
thanks,
Senior Democrat on Armed Services. I appreciate it, sir.
Yes, sir.